Boom, we're back. We have some more Q&A. I've got my notes, keep me on track like I always do. And today's question is, if I'm single, is dating in my 30s stacked against me? I have a couple of thoughts on this, starting with, it's all the better if you're dating in your 30s, because just as a function of life, everyone goes through a big change in their early, mid, and late 20s. I think your early and mid 20s, they kind of like phase together a little bit. Maybe you graduated high school and you're living by yourself for the first time, or you're in college and like you just want to party and explore your freedom and everything else. Like, that's okay, but I think the real meat of change happens in your late 20s, and that's where you're kind of growing out of your childish behaviors and you're looking at more like adult things. You're just scientifically, biologically, your brain is more developed, so you think about things differently, you assess risk differently, and you have a different mindset on life. So if you've already gone through that change, I think that sets you up in a much better place. But you really have to watch how rigid you've become as you age too. So there were people that I dated or were talking to, not even dating, they were of a similar age as I was, and they were just so rigid on how they thought, like their activities that they did. Like you want to go to dinner and then watch a movie and maybe go for a walk. Like, nope, I have to be in bed by this time. 9 o'clock, I got to be in bed, which means I have to be home by 8 because I have to start my routine, and it's going to ruin my whole day if I'm not trying to land that plane of sleepy time by 8 o'clock. That makes it really hard when it's a Friday and we got dinner at 6, and then you have to get you home or whatever by 8. And if you're not willing to like kind of flex, especially in that dating phase, I think that's indicative of what you might be in for. So, dating someone like that, or even you, certainly watch yourself and your behaviors and what you have probably solidified in your life, some of the, not necessarily the bad habits, but some of the good habits that you do. Like, you have become very dogmatic about certain things, and maybe those are things to look at so you become more dateable, if that makes sense, because you're a little bit more flexible while still not being a pushover. And I think dating in your 30s, you have a really good idea of what you like and what you don't like, and what you want out of life and what you don't want out of life and don't want out of a partner. A really good example is you have decided, like maybe you're 35 and you're dating and you're like, man, I just don't want to have kids, because by the time you date someone and then you're engaged and you have a little bit of a life together before you have kids, now you're starting at 40, and then you want to have kids. You're like, man, it's 18 years until they're out of the house at a minimum if you're like a good parent and you push them off into the world at 18, but we'll just say 22 after college. You got to look at that like, do I want to be 60-year-old, 62-year-old sending kid to college? Man, do you want to be an old dad? Can you handle not getting enough sleep, especially when they're kids? And do you have a job or career that allows you to take off all the time because the kids are sick and you got to have somebody home for them because they can't go to school? Like, all these things you have to think about. Maybe it's as easy as where do you want to live? Like, when I met my wife, like the first date, I had a couple of questions. It was like, do you want to have kids? Do you want to stay here forever? And a couple of other ones too. But I knew that I did not want to stay where we were both living at the time. And my plan was to move. And if she didn't feel the same way and she wanted to stay there forever, like some other women that I met, like, hey, this is just not going to work. Like, I know some people love where they live and they never want to move, but you have to understand what these like really big ideas are in your life and really big things that you are non-negotiable for you, so you don't end up losing yourself when you date and then eventually marry someone. It kind of goes into the next point too. Don't settle for someone who is good enough. I got married in my 30s, and there were women, they're nice people. They're good enough. And I couldn't be happier that I did not stay with them, because I knew some part of me was dying every day that I was with them, because I was settling. It felt like I was settling. If you get to a point where you are desperate and you're dating, and you're just trying to find anyone who's marginally compatible with you, when you settle, that's not going to be a good foundation for your relationship, both short and long term. And it's not really fair to her either. She might be like madly in love with you, and you're like, she's good enough, or Example might be you like to have intellectual conversations and you're growth minded and you like to go do things and like hiking or traveling or whatever it is. And this particular woman that you met is extremely attractive, but she's like a super, super girly kind of girl. She's never wants to, get dirty in the outdoors, or she never likes to travel. She's a homebody. Like all of these things you have to put into your calculus when you start dating later. Of like, these are non-negotiables for me and I'm not going to settle for it. And it helps you think about where you're willing to flex on. Like nobody's perfect. And you have to know like, well, if she's a 10, 10, 10 and maybe a 7 or an 8, am I willing to accept that 7 or an 8, which is an arbitrary number in your head, but am I willing to accept that 7 or an 8 because she's so amazing and all these other things? I think there's a difference between flexing on your criteria and settling, and you just have to kind of know where that line is. And most importantly, I think in your 30s, you're gonna have baggage. So have you worked through your baggage, and are you dating someone who's also worked through their baggage? We all have scars and injuries from past relationships and just through our childhood and life and everything else. Like, have you worked through any of that? Or do you come to that relationship with your pack full of rocks and you want to project your fears onto your partner because you haven't worked through them? Or do you have maybe an outdated model of how you think people should be treated, and the women that you're dating now are more progressive and like they just don't tolerate that kind of stuff? Maybe those are old mindsets that I learned from my parents and my grandparents, and they don't really serve me or anyone else, but they're like ingrained in there because that was the example that I had. Think about those things too. If you can work through some of those, that's gonna bring to the table so much better version of yourself. I think unless you meet just the most magnificent, fabulous person, or you just found the perfect match and you know it with your entire being, I don't really see the value of getting married in your 20s when you can have such a more rich relationship with yourself and your partner if you wait until your 30s. So instead of looking at is dating stacked against me in my 30s, I think it's quite the opposite. If you're dating in your 30s, that gives you such a different perspective on life that it's only value added. Now, as of course things like kids or whatever you have to consider, but if you're single, you have no kids or whatever, and you're dating in your 30s, I think that is just a great spot to be in. So maybe reframe it and look at it as a plus instead. All right, that's it for this one. I'll see you on the next one.